Okay, the talk I'm giving this month is about editing video with code. This is sort of a talk about a library called GStreamer Editing Services. The talk is sort of a bit meta because it's about some of the tech we've used to manage recording presentations like this one we're giving right now, and some of the services some of the software we've used to produce the recordings after the talks are completed. Yeah, so when the coronavirus pandemic started, we had started looking at various technologies which would allow Plug to continue working as an online-only user group, and we'd settled on the BigBlueButton software. It's open source. It doesn't require any client applications. You don't need to have an account to use it. It supported recording the presentations so that we would have a permanent record, and we could we'd be able to offer any sort of external speakers who came to talk at Plug that they would have a permanent record they could point out on their social media or similar. And best of all, there was the UWA University Computer Club had already set up an instance of it, and they were willing to let us use it. So there was a minimal amount of setup for us. Of course, luckily in Australia, we didn't actually end up having the requirement for online-only meetings was didn't go on quite as long as it has in some other countries. But we'd sort of continued looking at using BigBlueButton as a simple way of live streaming presentations. One of the problems we had was that the recordings which BigBlueButton produces, you could only view them through the BigBlueButton instance. It doesn't just spit out a simple video file. It sort of meant that if we decided that we wanted to switch from UCC's BigBlueButton instance to a Plug BigBlueButton instance, there would be a discontinuity between the recordings we had on the first instance and the recordings we had on the second instance. It also meant that all the recordings which we'd done before using BigBlueButton, they were all just sort of standard video files which we produced with the old video recording system. They would also be in a separate location. And it's also possible that as things go on, we might want to move to something other than BigBlueButton. So one of the questions was, can we get the video recordings out of BigBlueButton and just produce nice-looking videos? So this is sort of a screenshot of what BigBlueButton's recording playback system looks like. I think it's not actually a bad system because it's sort of designed to be interactive. So you can't see it from the screenshot here, but you can sort of resize it to decide how much room you want to give for the slides, how much room you want to show for the presenter's video. It's got playback control, so you can skip backwards and forwards. But again, this is all stuff which you don't really need if you're trying to produce a video. And so ideally, we'd want something to look a bit nicer than this. So the way BigBlueButton's playback system works is that it's a web page. There's a big mass of JavaScript which it loads up, which will load a couple of videos, loads an SVG file. It then sort of manages to sort of synchronize the video, so when you skip forward or backwards, it'll fast forward and rewind both video files. It will also decide which slide should be displayed at this particular point in time. if you're using the whiteboard annotations features, it'll make sure that only the annotations which are visible at this point in time are visible. It's a really nice system for an interactive system, but yeah. But one of the nice things is that there is a lot of information here which we could use to process the recording into some other form. So yeah, the idea was, can we just screen scrape everything and then off BBB process it in some way, and we should end up with a nice clean MP4. What? Oh, that's okay. And we should get render out a video, and we're done. So my first thought was, I'll just download everything. And again, that means I've got a couple of video files. I've got a massive an SVG file with giving the timing information to display all of the slides. I could probably just use GStreamer, because GStreamer can basically do anything. That was my thought. I played around with various live things in the past, and there's a compositor element which sort of allows you to combine various other video inputs and place them on various parts of the screen, and it will mix them together and give you a nice video output. I would probably have to set up a couple of, I was thinking I could set up some timers to automatically switch these inputs whenever slides change and various other things, and it got very complicated very quickly. And it also meant that to record the videos, I'd have to do it in real time, because my timers were all set up. Display this slide at 5 minutes through the thing. That means that I'd have to go. I'd have to be playing back in real time as the encoder. So I mean, couldn't go faster, and if the encoder's taking longer, it couldn't go slower. It was sort of a bit of a mess. Yeah. And of course, there's the issue that when you are sort of trying to reconfigure the pipelines, there's a question, is it going to happen immediately, or is there going to be some glitches or anything? So I was hoping it'll be something which I could do better. So GStreamer Editing Services. This is another library provided by the GStreamer project. It's a toolkit for building nonlinear video editing applications. And it sort of makes up the core of the PTV video editor. And like the rest of the GStreamer API, it's based on the GObject library. So there are language bindings for pretty much everything under the sun. So if you don't like programming it all in C, you can do it in JavaScript, Python, etc. I personally use Python just because that's something I'm familiar with, and it worked pretty well. So nonlinear video editing. This is, I suppose these days, if you've ever sort of done any video editing, you probably just call it video editing. The main difference, the idea is that you start off with a number of assets which you don't actually modify, and you've got a set of instructions which say how to take these assets and arrange them to produce the final video. So this is sort of in contrast to like using GIMP as an image editor, where you might start with an image, you apply some change which happens immediately, you apply more changes, and it's not at all clear how you would sort of reproduce these steps. That if you save over the original image, it's gone. You sort of lose any information about those intermediate steps. So this is so the GStreamer Editing Services. This is basically something which it's sort of a way that you can generate one of these edit lists to describe how to go from those original assets to the final video which you want. So the main components of a GStreamer Editing Services project, you've got a set of assets, which can be videos, sound files, images, etc. There is a timeline, which that's just represents the passage of time throughout the video. We have a set of layers, so that you can sort of layer one bit of video, some assets on top of each other. Inside each layer, we can add sort of add an asset to a layer which produces a clip. So we can sort of take sections of some of the assets and lay out, say, this one's going to run from time 0 to time 5 minutes, and this one's going to run from 5 minutes to 6 minutes, etc. You can't make, inside one of the layers, you can't have overlapping assets. So if you did have, but you can sort of create transitions between two assets, which kind of creates an extra clip to represent the change between one and the other. Of course, when you do have multiple layers, that does allow you to sort of overlap the clips from those multiple layers, and they'll all edit together. So I'm just going to go over very high level about the kinds of stuff the way you might use this from Python. Initializing and importing all of this. Importing the code is basically just using the PyGObject library, which sort of gives access to pretty much any glib-based library. So in this case, I'm importing GStreamer and GStreamer Editing Services, and I initialize the two, and at that point, I can basically just start using them. I can create a new timeline and get the project for the timeline. In this case, I've created a timeline which just has audio and video tracks, which you can also create sort of something which is only video or only has audio if you want. I don't think it's not quite as interesting to produce an audio-only project, but it is possible if you want to. And you can add a set of layers, as many as you need. We can add an asset to the project. It's in general just loading it from a file. You can also create other types of assets. For instance, you can have ones which take input from arbitrary GStreamer elements. That's sort of if you need to do something particularly weird, but in most cases you just want to load stuff from files because that's easily reproducible. It's going to produce the same thing each time you try to play back the project and render it into a video. Then you can sort of add the asset to the layer. In this case, we're sort of setting a start time for when the asset should start playing. We set how far into the asset we want to play. So like if we have like a 10-minute video and we want to play the last minute of the video at the 1 minute mark in our project, we might sort of set the start time to 1 minute, the in point to 9 minutes into the asset, and the duration to 1 minute. And here I'm just saying track type unknown, which basically just says add the layer and add the asset in the default method. So if it's a video asset, it'll add it as video. If it's audio, it'll add it as audio. But this means that you can also do things like some of the other arguments there. You can do things like add a video asset but ignore the audio, or only take the audio from the video and ignore the visuals or anything. So that's that's kind of that's sort of how you can sort of build up the structure of one of these projects with the layers, the assets, the clips, etc. So then the question is, what do you do once you've built up this structure? One thing you can do is create a pipeline which sort of allows you to playback the project through any GStreamer API. And you could potentially hook this up to an encoder element to render out the video, or you could just hook it up to display on the screen or whatever. But the thing I found more useful was that you could just tell it to save the project, which meant that you would end up with an XML file which represented all of those edits which we'd written up in the program. So saving the project, we can just sort of tell it to commit all of the edits we've made, and then save it to give the path name where we want to save it. And there's a couple of arguments which would probably be nice if they had default values, but I can't remember what the none and the true is, but yeah. Now there is a command line tool, and once we've got this XGES file, I can use this command line tool, which I can run gs launch --load project.xjs, and that will play the video back on screen, or I can tell it to output to a file, in which case it will hook it up to the encoder and output it. And the other nice thing, since these project files are the same as the inputs we use which PTV uses internally, I could just load it up. I think I've got a screenshot of that next. Oh, maybe not. Anyway, so how do we map the BBB recordings to GStreamer Editing Services? We had sort of one video file which has all of the audio from the presenters plus webcam footage. So I could add that one to a layer which basically lasts through the entire length of the project, and then I just resize it and tell it to put it down in the corner. I've got a second layer which would take the slides. So this basically takes each of the slide images and tells it where to start, where to end for each of those things. So each time it was taking some of the timing information from the BigBlueButton recording to decide where to show those images. There is a screen sharing feature in BigBlueButton where, again, we end up with video which represents whatever was on the presenter's screen while they're showing that. So we put that on another layer again. In this case, just made it so that the desk share video just played throughout the entire project, and it's positioned so that it's in the same location as the slides, and whenever no slide is visible, it will be showing the desk share, screen share video. And then added one last layer, which we just put a static image, which added the plug logo and whatever, and just sort of made it so it didn't look like a blank black void. Yeah, so that's the screenshot I was trying to think. This is sort of what PTV looks like after loading a video of Michael's Matrix talk, which he gave a couple of months ago. So again, you can sort of see that we've got the top layer is the camera footage, which also includes the audio. There wasn't any slides for Michael's talk because he basically presented everything through screen share, and you've got the screen share layer underneath that, and there's the backdrop underneath which gives the plug logo. So that was sort of basically, that was sort of the minimum viable product we sort of came up with as a way to start sort of being able to save off these presentations from BigBlueButton. And it seemed kind of useful, and we'd used it for a couple of, used it for at least one recording. So I just put I uploaded it all to GitHub under the plug organization, and posted a bit about it on Twitter and a few other places, and did a bit of promotion and decided to see how it would go. So it's actually got a fair bit of use, because it turns out there are a lot of other people in the world who've been using BigBlueButton to try and work around the pandemic restrictions. So in particular, I had friends in the GNOME community, and they were running the GuaDec conference through BigBlueButton. So I suggested, why don't you use my cool script to produce the videos? So we ended up with really nice looking videos there. They originally sort of didn't know what they were going to do for how to handle that. Also found there were some people in the Czech Republic who, there was an OpenAlt conference, which I think that's some microprocessor type things or something, that they rendered all the videos. They just told me afterwards they done it. The person who was working on that had added a feature to add start and end credits to one of these videos. So that was a feature we got from the community. Then there was also some other missing features which I just didn't implement originally because we weren't using them. So as I said earlier, there is a whiteboard feature in BigBlueButton where I can just start drawing on the slides. And that was just completely missing from the original version of the script, but we've now got support for that as well. So that's kind of worked out pretty well. So lastly, I think the main question is, what situations would you actually want to sort of pull out GStreamer Editing Services and use it for whatever you're doing? Because if you're doing sort of a one-off thing, it probably is easier to use a graphical video editor just to drag and drop your assets into the timeline, and it's probably going to serve you better than something like GStreamer Editing Services. I think the main cases where it really shines is if you've got sort of the data for a set of edit decisions for your project in some format other than what your video editor uses, you can basically write a program which will convert those edit decisions into a GStreamer Editing Services project and dump it out to an XGES file, and you've got your project. I think maybe one other simple possibility is, let's say that you were sort of walking around with a GoPro camera taking some footage, and at the same time you've got your camera which taking other photos. You could set up a slideshow which took the EXIF timestamps on your photos and combined that with the video you're shooting, and you could combine those two together, because I mean, it'd save sort of looking up the timestamps on all those photos and trying to set them so that they would sort of start in the project at the right times. The other sort of cases are where you want to produce the same type of project multiple times, doing it repeatably. So that's the other case for this, the BBB render code, which we've been working on, is that every time we do one of these presentations, we end up with a BBB recording, and we want to basically render it the same way each time. So I can generate a project for each individual presentation, and it'll come up the same. And of course, one of the other issues is that it doesn't have to be sort of a dichotomy between doing everything in a GUI and doing everything programmatically. You could sort of use these tools to start to sort of generate a sort of a draft of the project, save that off, load it into PTV, and do your final editing, move everything around, add some extra elements, add your transitions, whatever you whatever you think will work. And then once you're happy with everything, you can render the final product. Okay, so just a couple of links for things. So we've got the BBB render project, which is up on GitHub. We're happy to take, if there are missing features which people want, we're happy to take pull requests. I try to get around to edit to sort of reviewing everything and getting them merged. The PTV video editor, which is probably available in the Linux distribution you're currently using, and the GStreamer Editing Services documentation is up on the GStreamer website. And one of the nice things on that website is there's a little pull down where you can decide what language you want what programming language you want the documentation to be for. So you can switch between C, Python, and JavaScript, and you'll get some examples and syntax which looks familiar to you. So that was sort of the base. That's basically all of the stuff I had prepared. So I was wondering if there are questions. I'd be happy to try and answer them. So the question was about whether Guardic 2021 is going to be on BBB. I believe they are doing it online as well. I don't know what technology they're going to use, but it's probably going to be BBB again, just because they already had it set up and it mostly worked for the presentation. So maybe they'll streamline some things, but yeah. And of course, they successfully managed to get the videos out and published. So afterwards, that's good.
Point of interest, LCA this year, you use BBB for breakouts and tutorial type sessions and present a video.
All right.
LCA might use
so that was Nick saying that Linux.au had used BBB for some aspects and may use it for more stuff for the 2022 conference. Patrick?
The PTV, what type of hardware do you use to render out? Is it GPU intensive, or is it one of those ones where you just set it going and go to bed and wait in the morning?
So PTV, as far as hardware requirements go, as I said, the project files are just XGS. It's really going to depend on what your hardware's like. If you're rendering MPEG-4 video, H.264 or whatever, GStreamer does have hardware accelerated renderers, so usually accessed via the VA API. So in general, that's really going to depend on your GPU drivers. So on my laptop, which has got Intel GPU, that works fine. I've got a really ancient Radeon card on my desktop, and it doesn't provide H.264 encoders. Newer Radeon drivers do. I don't know about NVIDIA, but
I know about small size. So NVIDIA, depending on what and different parts support different.
yeah. So again, there's sort of a question: is the hardware encoder exposed, and does GStreamer know how to use it?
Yeah.
I don't really have much experience in trying to use hardware encoders with NVIDIA, so I can't really give you any.
To get H5, you need 10,000 series or greater.
Yeah.
And then the other H.264 works back to like.
Yeah, I generally found it was not really worth trying to do H.265.
Yeah, it's a lot of messing around, and if you don't have a distribution, which hits a final FFN version, you have to go and compile it yourself.
Right. Also, if your main target is YouTube, it's going to re-encode your video, whatever you upload.
Yeah.
So you're probably best off just picking H.264, just because it's most likely to make it through YouTube's pipeline without sort of misrendering or anything. Yes.
Could you go back to that slide of the overview you took before?
This one?
Yes. So the issue with BBB, the fact that it stores has a unique file storage mechanism because you've got 4 tracks there.
Okay. So in this particular case, we really only had 4 elements to make up Michael's project. There was one video which basically had the webcam track, which is basically one file which covers the entire length of the video, which gave us a picture of Michael plus audio of him speaking. He didn't use BigBlueButton's slides feature, so there was no extra slides there. He used the screen sharing feature, which meant that we've got another video which sort of ran for the entire duration of his talk. So that's 2 videos. There is one image which gives the plug logo in the background, and I think in this particular case we had some interruptions, so I played around a bit with it in PTV afterwards to add a little test pattern, but there really was only 4 assets making up that particular project. I would expect for this, when I render this particular talk, there's going to be a lot more because I'm using BigBlueButton's slides feature, so there would be an asset for each individual slide which you produce. So I mean, yeah, I could show you another project later, which will have a lot more. But yeah, it's only showing 4 because that's all there was in this project. It's an arbitrary number. It's whatever you add to your project. Right. So if you use BigBlueButton's inbuilt slides feature, you sort of upload a PDF file into BigBlueButton. It rips it apart and renders a PNG image for each individual slide so that it can basically tell each of the viewers, I've switched to slide 2. It sort of sends a very small message to each of those viewers saying, now show the slide 2 image, rather than, which is sort of, it's good from a bandwidth perspective because it means that you're not actually sending an extra video stream to each of the clients. You're basically just telling them load this static image and keep it up there until the presenter says to load a different static image. So if I'm rendering a project which was using the slides, then there would be a lot more assets in the library. Basically, whatever's needed.
There might be several speakers and several cameras.
Yeah, so Nick was saying there might be several speakers. In this particular case, BBB combines all of the speaker cameras into one video, so that doesn't make any changes from our GStreamer Editing Services scripts perspective. But again, this is sort of an area which might where we might be able to improve things, because like if you have 4 speakers in a presentation, the webcam footage will sort of be a box of 4, whereas if I'm displaying the speakers just on the side of the screen, maybe it would be better if I sliced that video in 2 and displayed it twice, one above the other. And in that case, we'd probably want to take we'd be using the same asset for both of those things. We'd have one of them cropping out the right-hand side, the other one cropping out the left, and we'd probably only want to include the audio track from one copy of the asset. So, I mean, there's various ways, but I don't think there's any information in the BigBlueButton recording info which tells us how many webcams are used in the webcam video file. And in fact, it can the number of cameras and how they're positioned in that video can change throughout the presentation. So
the format of these files, those specific.
So BigBlueButton, it provides WebM files for the speaker webcam video and the desk share. So this is using that's sort of a Matroska container containing VP8 video and Opus audio. It is a standard video format because like they're basically providing the video in a form which web browsers are going to be able to render without any extra plugins.
There's another reason why HTC is better than HTC.
Yeah.
As I discovered when I tried to convert all my media, certain browsers weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, the BigBlueButton's playback system is designed just to run, and the same as viewing live presentations, designed to sort of run in a web browser without any need for any plugins or anything. So yeah, they target standard video formats, which was nice because GStreamer Editing Service can load standard video formats. Do we have any more questions? Or are we? All right. Oh. Thank you.